Short story number 3. Skinwalkers, translucent shapeshifters, deep within the Atlin mines. Chapter 1. Innocent sightings. The sun was setting over Atlin, casting a golden hue over the dense woods that bordered the town. Children played near the edge of the forest, their laughter echoing through the trees. But as the shadows grew longer, their games took on a more hushed tone, their eyes darting to the darkening woods. "Look! There it is again!" young Peter exclaimed, pointing towards a shimmering, almost translucent figure that seemed to dance between the trees. The figure was tall, its form constantly shifting, making it hard to discern any distinct features. His friends squinted, trying to get a better look. "It's just the light playing tricks, dummy," scoffed Jenna, though her voice wavered slightly. But Peter was insistent. "No, I've seen it before. It's always there, watching." The children's discussions were full of whispers about these guardian spirits of the forest. While most dismissed them as products of active imaginations, there were a few who believed. Tales of translucent figures, always present but never harmful, had become a staple among the younger residents. At a local diner, Darcy sat sipping his coffee, overhearing snippets of conversations from neighboring tables. The tales of these mysterious figures had piqued his interest. He had been in Atlin long enough to know that sometimes legends had a kernel of truth to them. Meanwhile, Louise, with her penchant for local folklore, had been visiting families, gathering children's drawings for a community project. She began to notice a recurring theme. Many sketches depicted tall, shimmering figures, standing silently among the trees. Some were playful, with the figures dancing or playing hide and seek. Others had them standing guard, protective and watchful. Louise decided to lay out all the drawings on her living room floor. The similarities were uncanny. These weren't just random doodles. They depicted something the children had seen, something that had made a significant impact on them. Later that evening, as Darcy and Louise met up, their conversations inevitably veered towards the mysterious sightings. Darcy recounted the tales he'd overheard, while Louise showed him the children's drawings. "It can't be a coincidence," Darcy mused, examining one of the sketches. "These figures, they remind me of the legends of the Skinwalkers." Louise nodded in agreement. But why would they appear now? And why only to the children? The duo felt a growing unease. The legends of the Skinwalkers were not to be taken lightly. These shape-shifting entities had deep ties to the land and its history. If they were indeed making their presence known, there had to be a reason. As night enveloped Atlin, the woods seemed to come alive. The wind carried soft whispers, and every so often, a translucent figure could be seen, watching silently from the shadows. The town was on the brink of uncovering a mystery that had lain dormant for years, and Darcy and Louise were at the very heart of it. Chapter 2. Gathering testimonies. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the community center, casting a warm glow over the room. Darcy and Louise had set up a makeshift interview area, hoping to gather as much information as possible from the children who claimed to have seen the translucent figures. One by one, the children entered the room, their faces a mix of excitement and apprehension. Louise approached them with a gentle demeanor, offering them crayons and paper to draw as they spoke, hoping to put them at ease. The first child, a little girl named Elsie, shyly recounted her encounter. "It was tall and shimmery, like when you see heat rising from the ground," she said, her fingers tracing the outline of a figure on her paper. It didn't speak, but I felt like it wanted to play. As more children shared their experiences, a pattern began to emerge. They all spoke of the figures appearing during twilight, always at a distance, never threatening. Their descriptions were eerily similar: tall, translucent beings that seemed to shift and change with the wind. A young boy named Leo excitedly shared his story. "I named mine Luna because it glows like the moon," he said with a grin. "She gave me this." He held out a small, intricately carved stone pendant. The craftsmanship was exquisite, clearly the work of skilled hands. But what caught Darcy's attention was its age. The pendant looked ancient, its edges worn smooth by time. Louise's eyes widened as more children revealed similar gifts: a feathered charm, a beaded bracelet, a small clay figurine. Each artifact hinted at a bygone era, their designs reminiscent of the indigenous tribes that once inhabited the region. The testimonies took a turn when a quiet girl named Ivy spoke up. "They're sad," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "They're looking for something. Something that was taken from them." Darcy and Louise exchanged a glance. The weight of the children's words hung heavily in the air. These weren't just random sightings or overactive imaginations. The children had interacted with these beings, forming bonds and receiving gifts that seemed to bridge the gap between the past and the present. As the interviews concluded, Darcy and Louise gathered the artifacts, laying them out on a table. The items told a story of their own, each one a piece of a larger puzzle. The duo realized they were dealing with something far more complex than they had initially thought. Louise carefully examined the pendant Leo had received. "These artifacts, they're not just gifts. They're a message," she murmured. Darcy nodded in agreement. "A message from the past, reaching out to the present. But what are they trying to tell us?" The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the room. The duo felt a growing urgency to decipher the message of the Skinwalkers and uncover the truth behind their sudden appearance. The children's testimonies had provided valuable clues, but many questions remained unanswered. As night fell, the woods surrounding Atlin once again came alive with whispers and translucent figures. The town stood on the precipice of a mystery that spanned centuries, and Darcy and Louise were determined to unravel it. Chapter 3. Nightly observations. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the town of Atlin in a soft, velvety darkness. The woods, however, seemed even more alive, the trees whispering secrets to each other as the wind rustled their leaves. Darcy and Louise had set up a camp near the edge of the woods, their tent illuminated by the soft glow of a lantern. Louise sat cross-legged, her notebook open on her lap, jotting down observations. Darcy was fiddling with his camera, ensuring it was ready to capture any evidence of the translucent figures the children had described. As the night deepened, the duo began to hear soft giggles and the distant sound of children playing. Peering into the darkness, they could make out the silhouettes of children, their laughter echoing eerily in the stillness. Among them, shimmering figures moved gracefully, their forms almost ethereal. Darcy raised his camera, trying to focus on one of the figures. He snapped a few shots, but when he checked the images, they appeared blurry, the figures almost melting into the background, their outlines indistinct. Louise, meanwhile, felt a sudden drop in temperature. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to ward off the chill. As she did, one of the translucent figures drifted past her. The coldness intensified, sending shivers down her spine. It felt as if she was being enveloped by a cold that wasn't just physical but reached into the very depths of her soul. The figure paused, turning its gaze towards Louise. For a brief moment, their eyes locked, and Louise felt a rush of emotions, sorrow, longing, and an ancient pain. The figure then continued on its path, rejoining the others. From deeper within the woods, the duo began to hear soft, melodic chants. The sound was haunting, the words unfamiliar, yet they carried a weight of history and tradition. Darcy and Louise exchanged glances, realizing that they were hearing the ancient chants of the Skinwalkers. Drawn by the sound, they ventured deeper into the woods, following the chants. The trees seemed to close in around them, their shadows dancing eerily in the lantern's light. The ground beneath their feet felt soft, almost spongy, as if they were walking on ancient, sacred ground. As they moved further in, they came upon a clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient tree, its roots exposed, twisting and turning like gnarled fingers. Around the tree, the translucent figures danced, their movements fluid and graceful. The children sat in a circle, watching in awe, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of fireflies. Darcy tried to capture the scene with his camera, but once again, the images came out blurry. Frustrated, he put the camera down, deciding to rely on his own observations. Louise, on the other hand, was entranced by the dance. She felt a connection to the figures, an understanding that went beyond words. She realized that the Skinwalkers were not just legends or myths. They were guardians of the land, protectors of its secrets. The dance continued for what felt like hours, the chants growing louder and more intense. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it stopped. The figures bowed to the tree, their forms shimmering and fading away. The children, too, rose, their faces filled with wonder and reverence. Darcy and Louise made their way back to their camp, their minds buzzing with what they had witnessed. They knew they had been granted a rare glimpse into the world of the Skinwalkers, a world that was both beautiful and terrifying. As they settled into their tent, the sounds of the night surrounding them, they realized that their journey had only just begun. The mysteries of Atlin and its Skinwalkers were far from being unraveled, and they were determined to uncover the truth. Chapter 4. Historical dig. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Atlin Town Library, casting a warm glow over the rows of dusty books and manuscripts. Louise sat at a large wooden table, surrounded by stacks of old records, newspapers, and journals. The scent of aged paper filled the air, a testament to the history contained within these walls. She had been at it for hours, meticulously combing through the records, searching for any mention of the translucent figures or the Skinwalkers. Every so often, she would jot down notes, her hand moving swiftly across the pages of her notebook. As the hours passed, she stumbled upon a series of articles from the late 1800s. They spoke of guardian spirits that were said to protect the miners and their families. These spirits were revered, considered a blessing by the townsfolk. Intrigued, Louise delved deeper, trying to find a connection between these spirits and the Skinwalkers. In one of the older journals, she found a handwritten account by a miner named Jeremiah. He wrote of an encounter with a translucent figure while working deep within the mines. The figure had saved him from a cave-in, guiding him to safety. Jeremiah believed it to be one of the guardian spirits, a protector of the miners. Louise's heart raced as she turned the pages, eager to learn more. Tucked between the pages of the journal was an old photograph. It was faded with age, but the image was clear. A group of miners stood outside the entrance to a mine, their faces dirty and tired. But what caught Louise's attention were the translucent figures standing beside them. They appeared to be part of the group, their forms shimmering in the sunlight. She carefully removed the photograph, placing it in front of her. The figures looked similar to the ones she and Darcy had seen in the woods. Could these guardian spirits and the Skinwalkers be one and the same? Darcy entered the library, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He approached Louise, his eyes widening as he saw the photograph. "I've heard tales of this," he whispered, leaning closer. Old-timers spoke of miners making deals with these spirits. In exchange for protection within the mines, the miners would offer them gifts, perform rituals, and even make pacts. Louise looked up at him, realization dawning on her face. These spirits, they were once Skinwalkers. Over time, they became guardians, protectors of the town and its people. Darcy nodded, his expression grave. But something changed. The balance was disrupted. "We need to find out what caused this shift." The duo spent the rest of the day in the library, gathering as much information as they could. They found more accounts of miners interacting with the Skinwalkers, of rituals performed, and pacts made. It was clear that the relationship between the miners and the Skinwalkers was deep-rooted, going back generations. As evening approached, Louise and Darcy packed up their findings, their minds buzzing with theories and questions. They knew they were on the brink of uncovering a mystery that had been buried for decades. Outside, the setting sun cast long shadows over the town of Atlin. The duo walked side by side, the weight of their discoveries heavy on their minds. They were determined to get to the bottom of this, to unravel the secrets of the Skinwalkers and their connection to the town. But as they made their way through the streets, they couldn't shake off the feeling that they were being watched. The eyes of the Skinwalkers were upon them, and the journey ahead was bound to be fraught with danger and revelations. Chapter 5. The warning. The town of Atlin was bathed in the soft glow of twilight, the streets quiet and empty. Louise and Darcy were making their way back to their lodgings when a figure stepped out from the shadows of an alleyway. It was an old man, his skin weathered and lined with age, his eyes deep-set and piercing. He wore traditional indigenous attire, adorned with intricate beadwork and feathers. Louise felt a shiver run down her spine as the elder locked eyes with her. There was a depth to his gaze, a wisdom that spoke of countless years and untold stories. "You seek answers," the elder said, his voice raspy yet commanding. Louise nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "We're trying to understand the connection between the Skinwalkers and the guardian spirits." The elder motioned for them to follow him. They walked in silence, the only sound being the soft crunch of gravel beneath their feet. He led them to a small clearing overlooking the town, where a campfire burned, casting flickering shadows on the ground. The elder sat down by the fire, gesturing for Louise and Darcy to join him. "Long ago," he began, "the Skinwalkers roamed these lands, feared by all. They were powerful, capable of taking on any form they desired. But over time, as the town of Atlin grew and the miners arrived, the Skinwalkers found themselves pushed to the fringes." He paused, staring into the flames. A pact was made between the miners and the Skinwalkers. In exchange for their protection, the Skinwalkers would be allowed to live in peace, their territories untouched. And so, they transformed into guardian spirits, watching over the town and its people. Louise exchanged a glance with Darcy. This was the connection they had been searching for. But, the elder continued, his voice taking on a grave tone, these spirits are bound to the land. If their territory is threatened, they can revert to their original form, unleashing their wrath upon those who dare to cross them. Darcy leaned forward. Are you saying that the recent mining activities are causing the Skinwalkers to revert? The elder nodded. The miners are digging deeper, encroaching on sacred grounds. The balance has been disrupted, and the guardian spirits are restless. Louise felt a knot of dread form in her stomach. What can we do? The elder looked at her, his gaze unwavering. You must tread carefully. The spirits are watching, and they do not take kindly to outsiders meddling in their affairs. Darcy clenched his fists. We need to investigate the mining sites. Find out what they're up to. The elder gave them a solemn nod. Go with caution. And remember, the spirits are not to be trifled with. With that, he rose to his feet, disappearing into the shadows as silently as he had appeared. Louise and Darcy sat by the fire for a moment, the weight of the elder's words sinking in. They had a mission ahead of them, one fraught with danger and uncertainty. But they were determined to uncover the truth, to restore the balance and ensure the safety of the town. As they made their way back to their lodgings, the night air was thick with tension. The town of Atlin held many secrets, and the duo was about to delve deep into its mysteries. But one thing was clear. They were not alone in their quest. The spirits were watching, waiting, and the duo would need all their wits about them if they were to succeed. Chapter 6. Mining disruptions. The sun was high in the sky, casting a harsh light over the vast expanse of the mining site. The noise was deafening, with machinery roaring and workers shouting over the din. To Louise and Darcy, it felt like they were stepping into the very heart of desecration. As they ventured deeper into the site, the signs of disruption became more evident. Sacred sites, once revered and protected, were now gaping holes in the earth, their sanctity violated by the relentless pursuit of gold. Ancient symbols, carved into the rocks over centuries, lay shattered and broken, their meanings lost to the greed of man. Louise's heart ached as she walked among the ruins. Every step felt like a betrayal, a reminder of the price of progress. She bent down to examine one of the destroyed symbols, her fingers tracing the jagged edges. As she did, her hand brushed against something half buried in the dirt. It was a charm, its intricate design now broken and fragmented. As she held it, a rush of energy surged through her, so powerful that it took her breath away. This was no ordinary charm. It was a conduit of the ancient powers that once protected this land. Darcy, meanwhile, had spotted the site manager overseeing the operations from a makeshift office. With determination in his eyes, he marched over, demanding answers. Do you have any idea what you're doing here? He shouted over the noise. You're destroying sacred sites, erasing history. The site manager, a burly man with a no-nonsense demeanor, looked Darcy up and down, unimpressed. This is a mining operation, he retorted. We have permits. Everything is above board. But these are sacred sites. Darcy persisted. You can't just bulldoze over them for gold. The manager's face darkened. I suggest you leave, he growled, signaling to a couple of security guards nearby. Realizing they were outnumbered, Louise quickly joined Darcy's side. But before they were escorted out, she spotted a set of site plans left carelessly on a table. Seizing the opportunity, she swiped them, tucking them into her bag. As they were roughly pushed out of the site, the weight of what they had discovered pressed heavily on them. The mining company was not just digging for gold. They were unearthing ancient powers, disrupting the balance that had been maintained for centuries. Back at their lodgings, they spread out the stolen site plans. The detailed maps showed the extent of the excavations, with marked areas where the most significant finds had been made. But what caught their attention was a section marked as restricted. It was located deep within the mines, away from the main operations. This must be where they're finding the most valuable artifacts, Louise mused, her finger tracing the path to the restricted area. Darcy nodded, his face grim. We need to get in there, find out what they're hiding. The duo knew they were treading on dangerous ground. But with the fate of the sacred sites hanging in the balance, they were willing to risk everything to uncover the truth. The mining disruptions were just the tip of the iceberg, and Louise and Darcy were about to delve deep into the heart of the mystery. Chapter 7. The ritual site. The moon hung low in the sky, casting eerie shadows over the dense forest of Atlin. The stillness of the night was occasionally broken by the distant hoot of an owl or the rustling of leaves. Louise and Darcy, guided by the stolen site plans, made their way cautiously through the woods. The location marked as a void was deep within the forest, away from the prying eyes of the world. As they ventured further, the atmosphere grew palpably tense. The air was thick with an energy that seemed to pulse with every heartbeat. The trees, ancient and gnarled, stood as silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like twisted fingers. Suddenly, the dense canopy opened up to reveal a clearing. The sight that met their eyes was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone altar, surrounded by a circle of smaller stones. Each stone was inscribed with symbols that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Around the altar, ritualistic setups were evident: bowls filled with unknown liquids, animal bones arranged in specific patterns, and ancient totems that seemed to watch over the site. Louise, with her extensive knowledge of ancient rituals, recognized the significance of the site immediately. "This is a transformation site," she whispered, her voice filled with reverence. "It's where skinwalkers come to shed their earthly forms and become guardian spirits." Darcy looked around, taking in the gravity of their discovery. If the mining company excavates here, they'll destroy centuries of sacred history, he murmured. The duo explored the site further, finding evidence of recent rituals. Freshly burnt candles, remnants of offerings, and footprints that seemed neither human nor animal hinted at the continued importance of the site to the Skinwalkers. As they pondered their next move, a chilling realization dawned on them. The mining company's plans showed that this site was next on their list for excavation. The machinery, the noise, and the sheer disrespect for the sacred would soon descend upon this hallowed ground. "We can't let that happen," Louise declared, her voice firm with resolve. "We need to halt the mining operations by any means necessary." Darcy nodded in agreement. "We need a plan. We can't just march in there and demand they stop. We need evidence, allies, and a strategy." The duo spent the rest of the night brainstorming ideas. They considered rallying the townspeople, appealing to the local authorities, and even staging a protest. But they knew that the mining company, with its deep pockets and influence, would not be easily swayed. As dawn broke, a plan began to take shape. They would gather evidence of the site's significance, both historical and spiritual. They would reach out to experts in the field of paranormal research and indigenous rights. And they would use the power of the media to shine a spotlight on the mining company's desecration of sacred land. With renewed determination, Louise and Darcy set out on their mission. They knew the odds were stacked against them, but they were driven by a higher purpose. The ritual site, with its ancient secrets and powerful energy, had to be protected at all costs. The battle for the soul of Atlin had just begun. Chapter 8. Town's Resistance. The town hall of Atlin, usually a quiet and unassuming building, was buzzing with anticipation. Word had spread about the emergency meeting called by the town council, and the hall was packed to capacity. Whispers filled the air as townsfolk speculated about the agenda. Darcy and Louise, having meticulously prepared their presentation, took their places at the front. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on their shoulders. They knew they had to convince the town of the importance of preserving the ritual site. The council chairman, a stern middle-aged man named Mr. Henderson, called the meeting to order. "We are here to discuss the ongoing mining operations and their impact on our town," he began. "Mr. Darcy and Ms. Louise have requested this platform to present their findings." Darcy stepped forward, clearing his throat. He began by showing the photographs of the ritual site, the ancient artifacts, and the symbols on the stones. He spoke of the site's historical significance and its connection to the Skinwalkers. Louise took over, her voice filled with emotion as she recounted the children's interactions with the translucent figures. She displayed the drawings from the children's notebooks and the ancient gifts they had received. The room was silent as the duo concluded their presentation. The gravity of their findings was undeniable. However, the silence was soon broken by Mr. Thompson, a prominent businessman in Atlin. "While I respect your efforts," he began, his voice dripping with condescension, "we must consider the economic benefits of the mining operations. Jobs have been created, businesses are thriving, and our town is prospering." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Many in the town, especially the younger generation, viewed the mining operations as a boon, bringing much-needed revenue and opportunities. But not everyone was convinced. An elderly woman, Mrs. Blackwood, slowly rose from her seat. Her voice, though frail, carried the weight of wisdom. "I've lived in Atlin all my life," she began. "I've heard the tales of the Skinwalkers and the guardian spirits. We must respect our history and the land that has sustained us." Several other elders nodded in agreement, sharing their own stories and experiences. They spoke of the town's rich heritage and the importance of preserving it for future generations. The most poignant moment came when a group of children, led by a young girl named Lily, stepped forward. Holding up her drawing of a translucent figure, she said, "These spirits are our friends. They've protected us for generations. We can't let them be destroyed." The town hall was filled with a palpable tension. On one side were those who prioritized economic growth and saw the mining operations as a necessary evil. On the other were those who believed in preserving the town's history and protecting the sacred sites. Heated debates ensued. Accusations were hurled and tempers flared. The town, once united, was now deeply divided. As the meeting drew to a close, it was clear that no consensus had been reached. The fate of the ritual site hung in the balance. Darcy and Louise, though disheartened by the resistance they faced, were not ready to give up. They knew they had allies in the town, and together, they would fight to protect the legacy of Atlin and its guardian spirits. Chapter 9. Midnight confrontation. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the mining site. The distant hum of machinery had ceased for the night, replaced by the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. It was the perfect cover for Darcy and Louise as they approached the site, their silhouettes barely visible against the backdrop of the dense forest. Louise clutched a bag tightly to her chest, its contents crucial to their mission. It contained photographs, notes, and other evidence that would expose the mining company's disregard for the sacred sites. They had to ensure this evidence reached the right hands. Darcy, with his knowledge of machinery, had a plan to sabotage some of the equipment, hoping to delay the mining operations. Every day they could stall was another day for them to rally support and find a way to permanently halt the excavation. As they neared the site, Louise felt a sudden drop in temperature. She glanced around, her breath visible in the cold night air. From the corner of her eye, she saw them, translucent figures, shimmering and almost ethereal, watching them from a distance. The guardian spirits of Atlin. Darcy, too, noticed them and whispered, "They're here. They know what we're trying to do." The figures nodded slowly, their forms wavering like a mirage, signaling their approval. With renewed determination, the duo set to work. Darcy began tampering with the machinery, expertly disabling certain parts to ensure they wouldn't function. Louise, meanwhile, spray-painted messages on the large equipment. "Respect the spirits, this land is sacred, and Atlin's history is not for sale." As they were about to make their exit, a sudden beam of light blinded them. The blaring of an alarm pierced the night, and the once silent site was now alive with activity. Security personnel, equipped with flashlights and radios, began pouring out of nearby cabins. "Run!" Darcy shouted, grabbing Louise's hand. They sprinted towards the forest, the bag of evidence bouncing against Louise's side. But in the chaos and panic, she tripped over a rock, and the bag flew out of her grasp, landing a few feet away. Darcy, realizing they couldn't retrieve it without being caught, pulled her up. "Leave it. We need to go," he urged. The translucent figures, sensing the danger, moved swiftly, creating a barrier between the fleeing duo and the pursuing security. Their forms became more solid, more menacing, causing the security personnel to halt momentarily, their faces masks of terror. Using this brief respite, Darcy and Louise vanished into the thick woods, the sounds of the alarms growing fainter with each step. Once they felt they were at a safe distance, they stopped to catch their breath. Louise's face was a mix of frustration and worry. The evidence. It was all in that bag, she lamented. Darcy placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We'll find another way. We always do." As dawn began to break, the duo made their way back to Atlin, determined to continue their fight. But the loss of the evidence was a significant setback, and they knew the road ahead would be even more challenging. Chapter 10. The town's verdict. The morning sun cast long shadows over Atlin's town square, where the council was set to meet. Word had spread about the evidence found at the mining site, and the square was abuzz with whispers and hushed conversations. The mining company, seizing the opportunity, had plastered the town with posters showcasing the vandalism caused by Darcy and Louise. The images of the spray-painted machinery and the sabotaged equipment were displayed prominently, painting the duo as troublemakers rather than protectors. Inside the council chamber, the atmosphere was tense. The mining company's representatives sat on one side, their faces smug, confident in the narrative they had spun. On the other side, Darcy and Louise, looking weary but resolute, were joined by a handful of townsfolk who still believed in their cause. The council's head, Mr. Henderson, a stout man with a gruff demeanor, called the meeting to order. "We are here to decide the future of the mining operations in Atlin," he began. "Given the recent events and the evidence presented, we must consider if it's in the town's best interest to continue." The mining company's lead representative, a slick man named Mr. Blackwood, stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began with a rehearsed charm, "what happened the other night was nothing short of domestic terrorism. These individuals," he pointed accusingly at Darcy and Louise, "have tried to hinder progress and economic growth for our town." Louise, her voice steady, countered, "We were trying to protect our town's heritage, its history. The site you plan to destroy is sacred. It's more than just a piece of land. It's a part of Atlin's soul." The debate raged on, with both sides presenting their arguments. But as the hours passed, it became evident that the council, swayed by the mining company's promises of prosperity and jobs, was leaning in their favor. When the vote was finally called, the result was a crushing blow to Darcy, Louise, and their supporters. The council had voted overwhelmingly in favor of the mining company. Despair hung in the air, but Darcy, ever the fighter, whispered to Louise, "We can't give up." "Not now." Louise nodded, determination lighting up her eyes. "We have one more card to play." Over the next few days, the duo worked tirelessly, rallying the children who had seen the translucent figures and the townsfolk sympathetic to their cause. Word spread of a massive protest planned at the ritual site, a last-ditch effort to halt the mining operations. The day of the protest arrived, and the ritual site was transformed. Hundreds of townsfolk, young and old, gathered, holding signs that read, "Protect our heritage, save Atlin's soul, and respect the spirits." The children, their voices loud and clear, sang ancient chants they had learned from the translucent figures, their innocence and purity a stark contrast to the looming machinery. As the sun began to set, the atmosphere grew electric. The translucent figures, drawn by the energy of the protest, began to appear. They moved among the crowd, their presence a silent show of support. The mining company's security tried to disperse the crowd, but the sheer number of protesters and the ethereal support of the guardian spirits made it impossible. Hours turned into days, and the protest showed no sign of waning. The national media caught wind of the story, and soon, Atlin was in the spotlight. The mining company, under increasing pressure and bad publicity, was forced to reconsider. In a final town council meeting, with the eyes of the nation upon them, the decision was reversed. The mining operations at the ritual site were halted indefinitely. The town of Atlin had spoken, and their voices, combined with the whispers of the past, had triumphed. Darcy and Louise, standing side by side, looked out over the saved land, knowing that while this battle was won, their fight to protect Atlin's history was far from over. The story of the translucent shapeshifters, the guardian spirits of Atlin, would be a tale told for generations, a testament to the power of belief and the importance of preserving the past. Chapter 11. The final stand. The morning sun was obscured by a thick layer of clouds, casting a gray hue over the ritual site. The air was thick with tension, the kind that precedes a storm. The protesters, a motley group of townsfolk, stood defiantly, their numbers having swelled overnight. They were a sea of determined faces, holding placards and banners, their voices united in chants that echoed through the woods. On the other side, the mining company's security personnel formed a formidable line. Dressed in black uniforms and armed with batons and shields, they looked ready for a confrontation. Their leader, a tall, muscular man named Commander Griggs, shouted orders, ensuring his men were in formation. Darcy and Louise stood at the forefront of the protesters, their presence a beacon of hope. They had been through so much, and this was their final stand. They knew the stakes were high, and failure was not an option. As the hours ticked by, the standoff continued. Neither side was willing to back down. The protesters sang songs of Atlin's history, their voices a haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the very soul of the land. The security personnel, for their part, remained stoic, occasionally pushing back any protester who ventured too close. But as the day wore on, the tension reached a boiling point. A young protester, anger evident in his eyes, hurled a stone at the security line. It was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Within moments, skirmishes broke out. The security personnel, using their batons, tried to disperse the crowd, while the protesters fought back with whatever they had at hand. It was during this chaos that a hush fell over the crowd. From the woods, the translucent figures emerged. Their ethereal forms glided effortlessly, and they positioned themselves protectively in front of the children, who had been placed at the back for safety. The sight of these guardian spirits, standing tall against the might of the mining company, was awe-inspiring. Many in the crowd, who had previously doubted the existence of these figures, fell to their knees, tears streaming down their faces. Even some of the security personnel, witnessing this supernatural phenomenon, dropped their weapons, their faces a mask of shock and disbelief. Commander Griggs, seeing the tide turning and realizing the implications of a violent confrontation with these spirits, ordered a retreat. The security line began to fall back, their once imposing formation now broken and scattered. The mining company's executives, watching the events unfold from a distance, knew they were defeated. The combination of the protesters' resilience and the appearance of the translucent figures was a PR nightmare. Fearing the bad publicity and potential legal repercussions, they signaled for a parley. Louise, Darcy, and a few town elders met with the company's representatives. After hours of negotiations, an agreement was reached. The mining company would halt their operations at the ritual site indefinitely. In return, the town would allow them to explore alternative sites, provided they were not of historical or spiritual significance. As the news spread, the protesters erupted in joy. Their voices, combined with the soft hum of the translucent figures, created a symphony of victory. The guardian spirits, their purpose fulfilled, slowly faded away, returning to the woods from whence they came. That night, Atlin celebrated like never before. Bonfires were lit, and stories of the day's events were shared. The tale of the final stand, of the town's unity, and the guardian spirit's intervention would be passed down through generations. Darcy and Louise, sitting by a fire, looked at each other with a sense of accomplishment. They had faced insurmountable odds, but with the town's support and the guardian spirit's protection, they had triumphed. The ritual site was safe, and Atlin's history preserved. But as the celebrations continued, in the shadows, a few figures from the mining company whispered among themselves. The battle might have been lost, but the war was far from over. The duo knew their fight to protect Atlin's heritage was just beginning. Chapter 12. The pact renewed. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden hue over the town of Atlin. The previous day's events had left the town in a state of cautious optimism. The mining company's retreat was a victory, but the translucent figure's appearance had opened old wounds and rekindled ancient fears. Louise, having spent the night poring over old texts and manuscripts, knew that a ritual was needed to appease the disturbed spirits. The mysterious elder, who had approached her earlier, seemed to hold the key. He was known as Nahini, a name that resonated with the town's oldest inhabitants. His knowledge of the Skinwalkers and their history was unparalleled. In the heart of the woods, a clearing was chosen as the ritual site. The ground was covered in a layer of soft moss, and ancient trees, their branches intertwined, formed a natural canopy. At the center stood a large, flat stone, stained with the passage of time and countless ceremonies. Darcy, with his camera in hand, was ready to document the entire process. He felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. This was uncharted territory, and every moment was precious. As the ritual began, Louise and Nahini formed a circle with a group of chosen townsfolk. They held hands, their fingers interlocked, forming an unbroken chain. Nahini began chanting in a language long forgotten, his voice deep and resonant. Louise joined in, her voice harmonizing with his, creating a haunting melody that echoed through the woods. The air grew cold, and a thick mist began to envelop the clearing. The boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms seemed to blur. The translucent figures, drawn by the ritual's energy, began to emerge from the shadows. Their forms, initially ethereal, slowly began to solidify. The townsfolk, watching in awe, could see the true nature of these beings. They were skinwalkers, but not the malevolent entities of legend. These were guardians, protectors of the land and its secrets. As the chant reached its crescendo, Louise stepped forward, holding a ceremonial dagger. She made a small incision on her palm, allowing a few drops of blood to fall onto the stone. Nahini followed suit. The blood, representing the bond between humans and skinwalkers, seeped into the stone's cracks, glowing with a soft luminescence. The skinwalkers, now fully formed, approached the stone. One by one, they placed their hands on it, their fingers caressing the surface. A connection was formed, a bond renewed. The pact, once broken, was now restored. With the ritual complete, the atmosphere in the clearing changed. The tension that had been palpable was replaced by a sense of peace and harmony. The skinwalkers, their purpose fulfilled, nodded in acknowledgement. Without a word, they retreated into the woods, disappearing from sight. Nahini, his energy spent, collapsed to the ground. Louise rushed to his side, cradling his head in her lap. He looked up at her, a smile forming on his lips. "The pact is renewed," he whispered, "but remember, it is a delicate balance. Respect it, cherish it. Darcy, having captured the entire event, approached Louise. This was incredible, he said, his voice filled with emotion. We have a responsibility now to ensure that this pact is honored. Louise nodded in agreement. The Skinwalkers have shown us their true nature. It's up to us to ensure that their trust is not betrayed. As the townsfolk began to leave the clearing, a sense of unity prevailed. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something that would be passed down through generations. The pact with the Skinwalkers, once a source of fear, was now a symbol of hope and coexistence. But as the day gave way to night, and the town settled into its usual rhythm, Louise couldn't shake off a nagging feeling. The mining company's ambitions were far from over, and the battle to protect Atlin's heritage was just beginning. Chapter 13. Departure. The morning sun cast long shadows over the town of Atlin. The events of the past few days had left an indelible mark on its inhabitants. The mining company, under immense pressure from the media and the public, had finally agreed to respect the sacred sites. Their machinery, which once roared with defiance, now lay silent, a testament to the power of belief and unity. Darcy and Louise, once outsiders, were now an integral part of Atlin's tapestry. They had managed to bridge the gap between the old and the new, the known and the unknown. While many hailed them as heroes, champions of the town's heritage, there were others who remained skeptical. Whispers of publicity stunt and media manipulation could be heard in hushed tones. But the duo remained unfazed. They had achieved what they had set out to do. The children, who had been at the forefront of this supernatural encounter, gathered at the edge of the woods for one last time. They held hands, forming a circle, their innocent faces looking up in anticipation. And as if on cue, the translucent figures emerged. The guardian spirits, their purpose fulfilled, had come to bid farewell. There were no words, just a silent exchange of emotions. The children, tears streaming down their faces, waved as the figures retreated into the woods, disappearing from sight. Louise, watching from a distance, felt a lump in her throat. She approached the children, kneeling down to their level. "Remember," she said, her voice soft, "they will always be with you, watching over you. Respect them, honor them." The children nodded, their eyes filled with a mix of sadness and understanding. Darcy, meanwhile, was busy packing their equipment. The duo had decided to leave Atlin, their mission accomplished. But they were wary of future challenges. The mining company, despite its public stance, could not be trusted. And there were other towns, other mysteries waiting to be unraveled. As they drove out of Atlin, the town slowly receding in the rearview mirror, Louise turned to Darcy. "Do you think we did the right thing?" she asked, uncertainty in her eyes. Darcy, taking a moment to reflect, replied, "We did what we had to do. We gave the town a fighting chance. But the real battle lies ahead. It's up to the people of Atlin to ensure that their heritage is protected." The journey was long, and the road ahead uncertain. But the duo was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. They had faced the unknown and emerged victorious. But as they crossed the town's boundary, a chill ran down Louise's spine. She had a nagging feeling that their adventures were far from over. And as the sun set, casting a crimson hue over the horizon, a mysterious figure watched from the shadows. A new supernatural mystery was brewing, setting the stage for the next tale. We hope you have enjoyed our paranormal scary story about Skinwalkers in Atlin, number 2 of 7 in a miniseries. Please visit us at Paranormal Untold Stories. Come to listen to more of our scary stories collection. Paranormal Untold Stories encourages you to contact us if you have your own untold story that you would like our professionals team to put online as a scary story. Thank you. Please follow our YouTube channel, Paranormal Untold Stories, and encourage others to do the same. Paranormal Untold Stories.